This is such a great night to be in Paris. It's the 14 Juillet, Bastille Day, and the annual firework display is lighting up the sky behind the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower itself, just moments ago, was lit up with hundreds and hundreds of tiny sparklers. Now it's gone dark as the spectacle begins. And watching it and hearing the crowd, it's easy to forget that this commemorates the start of a revolution. And it soon became a very bloody revolution. But I've come to Paris to find out more about another reign of terror. Okay, yes, it wasn't so significant historically by any means. But it happened about 100 years later when in 1897 a tiny theatre opened its doors in the Pigalle area of Paris in the north of the city. And the theatre soon became a byword for blood, for gore, for horror. It was the beginning of the Grand Guignol.
It is a genre of horror. It is bloody. It is very bloody, but a little bit too bloody. That is the meaning of Grand Guignolesque.
The word guignol means puppet, and when former gendarme Oscar Métainier set up his Grand Guignol theatre, it was in direct reference to the puppet character Guignol, who was the much-censored figurehead for striking silk workers in Lyon at the beginning of the 19th century. And though the theatre became a major landmark in French life for 6 decades, by the time I was living in Paris as a 19-year-old nanny, and later studying drama, barely a mention was made of it. One of the people who since helped re-establish its reputation is Richard Hand, Professor of Drama at the University of Glamorgan.
It was a very small theatre. It was actually a deconsecrated chapel, and they retained the carved angels, and so inside the auditorium still had all the makings of a church.
There was nothing church-like, though, about what they were performing on that tiny stage there, was there?
Absolutely not. On the very first performance at the Grand Guignol, one of the short plays, called Mademoiselle Fifi, was about a prostitute murdering a Prussian soldier. And this was a sensation. And in a way, this was the beginning of what became the Grand Guignol trademark, a mixture of the erotic and the violent.
And there was clever marketing, because they used to have a doctor in the house as well, in case anyone should faint. Did people faint?
Well, so the legend says. There were these Grand Guignoleurs who would go and see the same plays again and again. They'd look at the Grand Guignol virgins and obviously say, wait, here comes the gruesome bit. Watch that young lady there scream or shudder or cover their eyes.
There's one lovely story about a particularly gruesome little play where these old women in an asylum who are so jealous of the young pretty girl in there that they gouge her eyes out with scissors. Evidently one woman fainted at that and they called for the doctor, but he'd also fainted.
That's right, this is all stuff of the legend of the Grand Guignol.
Was it the owl's cry that waked her?
That's the death signal.
Oh, it's awful to be here with these mad women.
You're madder than we are.
She thinks she's not mad anymore.
That she's soon to leave the asylum.
You'll never get out.
I don't want to stay here all alone. I don't want to.
You're not all alone.
We're both here.
Leave me alone. Leave.
The intimacy of the theatre is extremely important. I think it was a shock for audience when they first went there, and as these comments that you could shake hands with the actors, it was that intimate a space. Obviously for an intense horror experience, what a fantastic venue to create claustrophobia. So you have plays that are set in prison cells, in asylum cells, in lighthouses, in brothels, in surgeries, very close, tight, claustrophobic environments, with the audience felt they were trapped in there. That's what makes the Grand Guignol Theatre in Paris one of the most important site-specific venues in theatre history in some ways. That extraordinary environment and the deconsecrated background to it. People watching the extremes, the taboos of sex, violence and death on stage. And if they turn away, you have these 8-foot angels looking down at you, which must have added to the guilt and perversely the pleasure of the whole experience.
I'm rattling along on the metro now on the Port d'Orléans line towards Montparnasse, and I'm off to meet Agnès Perron. Agnès is one of the foremost authorities on Le Grand Guignol Theatre,
And I'm meeting her, rather appropriately, at the Dome Cafe. Now, the Dome was made famous by writers such as Hemingway, and it opened towards the end of the 19th century, just a few months after Le Grand Guignol had opened in the north of the city in 1897. Why this fascination with horror, with blood at this time, Anya?
Yes, it has to do with the papers. Le Petit Journal, Le Petit Journal Illustré. It was always to do with catastrophe, disasters, trains, people who killed. It was always here the bloody story of that mother. The daughter killed the mother. There were blood everywhere. So it is the atmosphere at that time.
So Le Grand Guignol grew out of this appetite for ordinary people, the accidents, the murders, criminaux.
But we can say, on the contrary, that the people think that it is a popular theatre. It is not. It is a bourgeois theatre, written by bourgeois people and seen by bourgeois people.
So the people going were not the local people living around the theatre at the time, but the kind of bourgeois middle class who wanted a little taste of that seediness.
It was the fashion, and the Grand Guignol participates of that tendency.
When the theatre was at its height, Agnes, between the two world wars, I've read that in the audience were royalty, were celebrities going to see Le Grand Guignol.
Oui. Because Le Grand Guignol was the place to go. Like Notre-Dame, la Tour Eiffel, l'Arc de Triomphe, the big places
pour les touristes,
and the Grand Guignol. It was a place for lovers. If a man wanted to be with a well-educated young woman, he took the young woman in the Grand Guignol. So she was so frightened that she
threw herself.
She threw in the arms. And so it was quickly done. Puff, in the arms.
And also, Agnes, there are these little booths behind barriers. No one could see them.
There were 8 what we call loges grillées. The people who want to do it, they can make love in those 8 loges grillées. Certainly for the people who are excited by blood, who are a little bit perverse and sadic. Yes, of course.
I'm on the Rue Chaptal. The actual site of the original theatre is just down here on the right, a side road just off the main Rue Chaptal. And if I turn round, the first thing I see on rounding the corner here is at the end, bright yellow, absolutely bright yellow. The original theatre's now been painted. It's a narrow dead end, and it's cobbled. So there is a sense of the atmosphere that must have been around then. Someone said when you walked up here, you were looking over your shoulder because you just felt someone would be following you. As I get closer to the facade of the International Visual Theatre as it is now, you can see quite clearly the arch over the front door, and that's the only hint really that this is ever once the chapel of a convent. And it's a shame because really that's all that remains now. Inside has been completely gutted. The original wood, the angels, the box, the grills that people used to sit behind, all that is gone now. And so really this is the closest anyone can get nowadays to the original Grand Guignol.
Each evening at the Grand Guignol would present was a repertoire of short, typically one-act plays. What they also did was intersperse horror with comedy. If you think of how audience might react, they might be quite frightened by the first play. The second play, lots of laughs, slapstick, innuendo, people having a good gut laugh at that, relaxing. then you can really knock them for 6 the next moment.
Be quiet, my pet. I beg you, dear little Pierre. Yes, put out the lamp. Tell Lynette. Directly. That will drive them away.
I was reading about one from 1901 called Au Téléphone.
I think Au Téléphone is an extraordinary play. You've got this bourgeois character who's very proud of this new telephone he's had installed, but it becomes an object of horror because at the other end of the line he hears his wife and child being murdered and he can't do anything about it because he's miles away.
Ah! Call! Shout! Frighten them! Scream! Call! Cry! Help! It's ghastly. Yes, you're right. Don't scream.
In a way, it establishes precedent because there's a whole subgenre in horror films that is about the terror of technology. And any horror films where the phone lines get cut, or more recently, they can't get a signal on the mobile phone, you can trace it back to 1901, where the Grand Guignol builds a whole horror play around the telephone.
Martha! Martha, was that you? Answer! Answer, I say! What are they doing to you? Oh, they're being killed! Help! Murder! Murder! Help!
Well, one thing which keeps catching my eye is a poster. It seems to be on all the buses here going past, and it's a new film coming out very soon, and the tagline for it is See, Sex and Blood. Well, it's for Piranha 3D, but of course blood and sex was such a staple of the Grand Guignol, and this film, I suppose, is just the latest in a whole genre of slasher horror movies, which began with a film called Blood Feast and really took over where the Grand Guignol left off. Well, I'm on my way now to a cafe near the Gare du Nord to meet Philippe Royer. He's a film critic and he's written a book all about horror cinema, and the subtitle of that is L'esthétique du sang, the aesthetic of blood, and he should be able to explain the link between horror in the theatre and that on the big screen.
Yes, in my book I put a letter from David Friedman, who was the producer of Blood Feast 1963, and he said we got the idea of Blood Feast, of this kind of movie, of gory movie, after we were at the Grand Guignol Theatre, and we say, it could be an idea to put there on the movies. Till this time, it was always clean.
Was there something about Paris then? It was the centre of the world for culture. There was something special about Paris, do you think, at that time?
Yes, because it was the time of the surrealism, and there is a link between Grand Guignol and, for instance, Un Chien Andalou by Louis Buñuel and Salvador Dali, 1927, who begins with this famous shot of the eye cut with a razor. It's about the body, the corpse, and that is the Grand Guignol. It's always the body.
On stage, Le Grand Guignol liked eyes. They used sheep's eyes and cow's eyes because they could throw them into the audience, and they said they made a really nice splat noise.
In fact, at the beginning there was eye of sheep, but after that they stopped because there was some cat who are going to the stage to eat.
No.
Yes.
I don't believe you. No.
I read it. I was not there.
What about Tarantino? Do you think there are elements of, for example, Reservoir Dogs that are like Grand Guignol?
Yes, evidently. I think the famous sequence of the ear with cut, because it's not only cut, but there is a ritual about that. The guy say, I will torture you. You are a cop, I am a gangster, but I don't care what you have to say. At the last moment, the camera travel a little pan and you see something else. And you say, then there was not gory effect. But after that, the gangster take the ear and show the ear to the cop and say, hello, are you listening to me? Then it's really a gory effect, it's a bloody effect, it's like Grand Guignol. All the films by David Cronenberg till the 90s are undecided. When you watch Videodrome or even The Fly, that I think this kind of pictures, like the Theatre of Grand Guignol, is an experiment of excess.
Tell me, where are you, love?
Tim Burton's version of Sweeney Todd owes a great deal to Grand Guignol.
Yes.
Nothing's gonna harm you, not while I'm around.
You must remember that at the beginning it was a musical, and already on the stage there were bloody effects. It's more horrible in the movies with Tim Burton.
So let's keep living it, just keep living it, really living it.
But it's stylized, isn't it? Yes.
Yes, but the Grand Guignol is stylized because the fake is in the shooting. Even in Un Chien Andalou, it was not a real eye who was cut at the beginning. If you freeze the DVD, you can see it's not a human eye.
You've done that, haven't you?
Yes.
You've frozen the
Yes.
DVD.
Ah,
I
yes.
know.
I'm a specialist. There is a need. Aristotle, the Greek one, said the people like to see injuries on stage. Shakespeare was from the first to speak about blood and gore. With the cinema, it's more realist.
So there's no doubt for you, Philippe, that Le Grand Guignol influenced the arts that came afterwards. As the Grand Guignol finished in the 60s, the horror movies took off.
For me, it's evident. It's another way to express the same. And there is the Grand Guignol in Paris. For me, it's a legacy.
I'm heading back on the Eurostar now, and it's interesting that really all that exists still of the Grand Guignol in Paris is that plaque at the end of the alleyway where the theatre used to be in the Pigalle. But it does remain popular in other parts of the world, and I'm going to meet the theatre director Adam Megiddo at St Pancras, and he for the last few years has revived Le Grand Guignol on the London stage under the railway arches in Southwark.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. The local time is 8.
Well, I like my theatre to be live and dangerous, and I like the audience to feel that anything can happen at any time. And I think it was very powerfully realised in the Grand Guignol because of the visceral nature of the theatrical adventure. Once you plunge your audience into the darkness, they start to become frightened. Some of the oldest tricks in the book in terms of spooks and jumps and things like that always work, and they still work every time that we employ them in a Grand Guignol season. We've got all sorts of blood-making techniques which we picked up over the years. It's been like the old Grand Guignol where they developed their own recipes for blood. Well, we've had to do the same. Freezer bags are the best way of making a blood bag because they're thin, you can tie them up and you can discreetly put them somewhere and you can burst them very easily.
And tell me about Sarah Louise Young last year, because I think she was singing some of Paula Max's songs.
Sarah Louise, she was in the event last year and will be in the event this year in October, weaving her way between the plays in a sort of a Grand Guignol style dark cabaret. And last year she did a piece about the famous Grand Guignol actress Maxa, who died several thousand ways on stage, and she sings about the various ways in which she's been killed.
My name is Maxa, and I'm an actor who every night must die on stage with a blunt axe while you relax. My husband hacks me in a jealous rage.
Paula Maxa, she was a huge part of the Grand Guignol movement, really in its heyday. She was called the most assassinated woman in the world.
I've been garroted, intestines knotted. There is no pain I won't endure. With blood,
there's not a lot of information about her. There's long lists of the terrible things that she went through on stage. She was meant to be assassinated over 10,000 times. She was raped 3,000 times. But actually, in terms of who she was and how she felt, there's not much information.
My body tortured, torn apart.
She arrived in 1917, and she was actually asked to leave in 1930 when Jacques Jouvin came along. He wanted to really kind of shake up the theatre, and apparently, legend has it, he was jealous of her because she was attracting audiences just by herself. So she went off, and actually she started her own theatre company, which unfortunately didn't succeed.
And though you'll hear the crunch of my legs breaking, you'll know these anguished screams of pain I'm
faking.
I started to think about what she might have felt after years and years and years of being daily and nightly mutilated and raped and asphyxiated and drowned and stabbed. And that formed the basis of the song that we wrote.
I have been baited, humiliated, disfigured, drowned, and force-fed glass, with irons weighted, stretched, stoned, and slated, had a red-hot poker thrust inside my arm.
I think what audiences expected changed over the span of the Grand Guignol, and certainly in the 50s and 60s it had become a bit more hammer horror, and I don't think anyone other than American tourists and students really went expecting to see something real. But I think certainly when Maxa came on the scene around 1917, people were genuinely disgusted by what they saw. She was kissed by a leper and devoured by a puma and decomposed, and there's a description of her literally decomposing in 2 minutes. I've no idea how they did it, whether it was lighting effect or what it was, but this idea of this incredibly beautiful woman becoming this grotesque, nasty creature just totally captured people's imaginations.
I splutter and I cough. Won't someone please finish me off?
The thing that I have a problem with Grand Guignol and homage to that subsequently is a lot of the violence, practically all the violence that I can see, is directed towards women. And experts say, well, no, actually everybody suffered. Last year in your season there was quite a bit of controversy with the Nil Labute, which is this awful play where a woman is murdered and then raped afterwards. Do you think they are misogynist?
Well, actually, I think, and if you look at the Grand Guignol history, yeah, I think a lot of it is. Almost every single play there is written by a man and directed by a man. So, yeah, I think there is a streak of that in the history of it. In our attempts to reinvent it in the 21st century, it's really important that we have female writers and female directors creating their take on the subject. If it's just sensationalism, if it's just thrill peddling, I have no interest in doing it or putting it on. It's got to be thematically exciting and something which addresses the question of why on earth we went to the theatre to see all this in the first place.
The Grand Guignol first came to these shores quite a long time ago, in the 1920s, when it was transported from Paris right into the heart of London. And here we are in John Adams Street. I'm joined again by Professor Richard Hand.
There was the little theatre, aptly named. An interesting character called José Levy. His dream was always to bring the Grand Guignol to London. The Stage magazine reviewed the opening night. It said, at best, Levy can give us but partly anglicised Grand Guignol. The Gallic cock must lose many of his best and gaudiest feathers in crossing the Channel. The Lord Chamberlain's office could ban a play completely. Numerous plays were banned. They were not permitted for performance. The play called The Old Women. Now, this was written by André Delorde, the Prince of Terror from Paris. The climax of the play is 3 lunatics surround the young woman. They believe that there's an owl residing behind her eyeballs. So the only way to set the owl free is to gouge out the eyes.
And would they show an owl come out her eyes? Would an owl fly?
No, I mean, this is the great kind of...
That wasn't an owl there. I was taken in.
Anyway, when they had this script, they realised the censor would not permit this. There's no way. So George Beelby, one of the main actors in the Grand Guignol, had a friend who was a vicar. He did them a favour. He sent the script asking for licence to perform it at a jamboree, obviously giving the impression it was for children and little old ladies. So it was approved by the censor. The implication is the censor didn't read it. So it was approved. So once it had got its licence, it appeared on John Adams Street in London's Grand Guignol. And this was greeted with much hilarity by the Grand Guignol team, also some of the press, but actually it was bittersweet. The Lord Chamberlain's office was furious about being ridiculed like this and tricked like this. Everything was scrutinised. They were under such pressure, the end was in sight, really. It was only around for 2 years, but well over 40 plays in that time were performed. And let's not forget some of the actors involved. Sybil Thorndike and her brother Russell Thorndike, and Sybil's husband Lewis Casson. These were major figures. Also a young writer called Noel Coward wrote a short play for the Grand Guignol. Joseph Conrad, he went to a matinee performance at the Grand Guignol went home and wrote a play for them. He sent it in. Unfortunately, Levy turned it down, which is a shame and rather embarrassing for Conrad, probably.
Pigalle was the notorious red light district of Paris, and I think it still is. It's full of sex shops, of nude cabarets. There's a supermarché érotique across the road from me, and of course the famous Moulin Rouge. But it's become almost a parody of itself these days, because in this bright afternoon sunshine on a July day, there's families here, there's tourists, they're all taking photographs, they all think it's a bit of a laugh, quite honestly. And I think that was part of the problem for the Grand Guignol. It did become almost a parody of itself after the war. And there's a quote in Time magazine, an article in 1947, talking about the 50th season, and it says, "It was not like the old days. Nobody in the audience even fainted." And it goes on to quote the English actress who was running it at the time, and she says, "Really, I've almost come to the conclusion that the only way to frighten a French audience since the war is to cut up a woman on the stage, a live woman, of course, and throw them the pieces." And that's it. When you rely on shock tactics, there comes a point, there has to come a point where you cannot go any further. And that, for me, was the beginning of the end of the Grand Guignol.
So it ended because all the specialty theatres in France disappeared. So the Grand Guignol was one, he disappeared. Theatre after the Second World War was completely different. More politic, more philosophy, and it was like a joke in the Grand Guignol. Yes, I would have preferred that the place would continue, but can a theatre only based on blood be live in Paris nowadays? I don't think so. I don't think so. So what is done now, it's not so bad. Not so bad.
It's hard to appreciate the impact Le Grand Guignol must have had to an audience unused to the excesses of gory movies and the nightly news. But if the only horror you'd ever seen was some grisly fairground attraction years ago, imagine being in that tiny theatre, almost upon the stage, with every sense assaulted as you anticipated the regular backstage cry of "Vite Edmond, warm up the blood." How thrillingly subversive it must have been for a boiled, skinned head to land in your lap. As one contemporary observer, author Aeneas Nin, put it, "I surrendered myself to the Grand Guignol, to the venerable filth which used to cause such shivers of horror, which used to petrify us with terror. All our nightmares of sadism and perversion were played out on that stage."